Hello again, and welcome back to my show. It's Monday and it's really hot again. We had a wonderfully sunny Sunday. It poured down on Saturday night. It stayed dry for most of the day that we went bird watching at Leighton Moss in near Carnforth and Morecambe. We were there on Saturday looking at birds for a stag weekend for our friend Darren. It was his idea that he'd have quite a sedate and civilised stag weekend, and a bunch of us went bird watching and tramping about in the marshes, looking and seeing. We actually saw all the things that people go looking for in that particular bird sanctuary. We saw bitterns, or one anyway, shooting across the marsh. We didn't see bearded tits, which are famous. The area is famous for its saving of bearded tits. But when we look back at all our photos, we look like a bunch of bearded tits. Me and Jeremy certainly did. And Panda was there. We had binoculars and we sat in hides and we looked at all this stuff and had a nice tour from a very enthusiastic lady who works there, who pointed out all the salient features and taught us about the place and what goes on. And then we had fish and chips, and it poured down, but then Saturday was brilliant and sunny. And Jeremy and I went to Morecambe, where I have memories of being in Morecambe and it being the most dismal place in the world. The darkest, dingiest, wettest seaside resort, the most run down and decayed seaside resort I've ever been in. But we saw it at its best in the sun. And Sunday morning, hordes of people were out having coffee and ice cream and going to the amusement arcades and just sitting about. It was like a continental city. It was really lovely. And we were there especially for the old Pier Bookshop, which we've been to before. It's a proper second-hand bookshop that goes back room after room after room through this old house until you're not even sure where you are anymore. And there are at least 3 roomfuls of science fiction paperbacks, it seems. So I did buy books. And I did in Lancaster as well, where we went next, so I could wallow in the nostalgia of a place that I'd been a student in all those years ago. I was a student in Lancaster for 7 years, and I left 30 years ago, almost to the month. In fact, I think to the month. I think June 95 was when I moved to Edinburgh to be a full-time writer and be away from academia briefly. Lancaster's got a very special place really in my head and in my heart. And poor Jeremy had to listen as I said what had changed, what was new, all those kinds of things. What was still the same? And some things were still the same. They've lost the wonderful old Waterstones that opened while I was there. That was underneath is it the George Hotel? It's a very fancy Victorian hotel, famous as the place that Wilkie Collins and Charles Dickens wrote a ghost story together as part of their book that they wrote together. As my Shakespeare tutor once told me, in a gay bar round the back, the first gay bar I'd ever been to, round the back of that hotel, this was where they wrote together. And I made some kind of off-colour joke about Dickens and Wilkie Collins putting the willies up each other, which didn't go down well. But anyway, there was this wonderful bookshop there. Waterstones was really glitzy. It had a big chandelier downstairs in the main fiction room, and it was there for years and years, and they've closed it. They've opened some other smaller one, and this has become some kind of restaurant tea room that wasn't even open. So that was disappointing, but the cafe in Bashful Alley was still there, down this little alleyway, close to Waterstones. And it's called something else, but it's got a bay window and beveled glass. It was closed, but I think it's generally open on weekdays. It's where we used to go and have cinnamon toast and coffee on rainy afternoons, and I would write in this tiny, tiny cafe. So there were lots of things that still survived, even though they've pulled down the old cinema and, things aren't quite as good as they used to be. But it was busy, and full of people and sunny, and we found that the Whale Tail Cafe was still the same. It was boasting on all of its placards that it was 30 years old. Well, I know for a fact it's much older than that because we first started going in '89. It's a whole food veggie cafe above a whole food veggie shop in the eaves of this wonderful old building with bare stone walls all painted and hippie-ish artwork and multicolored salads and mung beans and sprouting things and lentils, many lentils. And it was fantastic to find it exactly the same as it was in 1988. And so we had lunch. And then read a fanzine that was on sale there, a fanzine about the town, a very sarcastic fanzine called The Lancastrian, which I read cover to cover and hooted at. It was really good. I think it's a kind of anonymously produced thing that comes out once a month. We could do with more fanzines cranked out on photocopiers, taking the piss out of places. And then we got in the car and came home, and it was a good weekend. But I am left with a whole pile of books that I have to tell you about. These, you can't quite see. I have a book haul to discuss, and they come from some from our weekend, some from the Friday right before when we went to Stockport for the afternoon, and books happened there too. So that'll be the rest of this video. I'm going to talk you through the nonsense. I've bought a lot of the things that I bought when I was away were books that I've already read at some point in the 80s or 90s and for some reason no longer own. And so copies of them kind of fell into my hands, and there's a nostalgia about all of them. There are some new things, completely new things that I haven't ever read before, so that's good. I just realised we're on the last day of June, which means that I've got to go on and do my best of June video and show you everything I read or dipped into or abandoned or loved more than life itself during the month of June, and pick out what was my favourite, what's the 5-star reads of June. It was a pretty good month, I think, for the best books, but it was also a good month for abandoning things as well. And that also brings us to halfway through the year, so there's another video that'll have to be on its way discussing the first 6 months of 2025 and picking out my top 5-star reads and seeing if I've got one per month favourite book. That would be smashing if I could do that. Building up towards that top list for the end of the year, which is usually about 10 or 12 books a year. God, that's boring. Sorry, these are the next few videos that I'm planning to do. I should do fancily edited ones of me going into the old Pier Bookshop through all those musty, crammed together rooms and talking to the owner and laughing at Jeremy as he does his vinyl searching and talking about Grace Jones with the bookshop owner. I should have video of all of that, but I haven't. I'm sorry. You're relying on me talking to you in my study. I did do one video, didn't I, when we went to Haworth and I talked to the nice lady in the bookshop there, and that was quite good. Although there was that embarrassing moment when she talked about magical realism and people redoing classic stories in a modern style. And I said, oh, I did a series about the Bride of Frankenstein. And she just went, oh, did you? Wasn't at all interested. Just skip over that. So maybe I'm best off talking in my study straight to you. Anyway, my book haul. I'll begin with Friday in Stockport. And I ended up with books when I wasn't expecting to. I thought I'd escaped scot-free from all the charity shops, but 50p for a copy of Joan G. Robinson's When Marnie Was There. Something I think I read years ago. It came out in '69 when I was a kid. When I was born, rather. It's one of those books I gather, like Charlotte Sometimes, or Lucy and the Ghost. What's that one called? there was a film by Studio Ghibli. So maybe I'm mixed up in that I have seen that. Maybe I did read this. There was a young woman behind the counter in the YMCA shop where I bought this for 50p, and she went, "Oh, the film of this, the cartoon of this, made me cry." And for some reason, my kind of ridiculous empathy, imagination, whatever, led me to say, "I know." And what I meant to say was, "Yes, me too." But I made it sound kind of peculiar, like I knew somehow that she'd cry during this. Maybe I am just psychic. But it has that feeling about it, and certainly the film did. It also makes me think of Sylvia War, and although I think you pronounce her name Worf, I'm not sure, who wrote the Menims. And then The Borrowers as well is there, isn't it? So we'll see. Sent away from her foster home one long hot summer to a sleepy Norfolk village by the sea, Anna dreams her days away among the sandhills and marshes. She never expected to meet a friend like Marnie, someone who doesn't judge Anna for being ordinary and not even trying. But no sooner has Anna learnt the loveliness of friendship than Marnie vanishes. The quietness of that I love. When so many kids' books these days have to be about being aspirational and being your best and living your best life and all that kind of slightly kind of Hitler Youth stuff, inspirational stuff that not just kids' books, the whole of our kind of slightly naff culture goes in for these days. It's lovely to be reminded of a time when the heroine of a book could feel ordinary and as if she wasn't even trying, and a ghost that can't even be asked to stick around gives her a bit more self-belief, but not much. Again, I'm talking about mixed feelings and the importance of that, because that's what most of our feelings are. And there's something about this very sentimental age that we live in, this very propagandist age that we live in, of authoritarian figures and people who are feeling they're on the right side of history all the time by the opinions they hold, just because of the opinions they hold. That tries to make feelings seem as if they're very straightforward, as if everything is polarized, and they're not. Feelings are mixed. And I love kids' books that remind us of the kind of stew of ill feeling and annoyance that most of us spend most of our time in. Mixed feelings. Anyway, other books from that day. T.J. Klune I've read before. I read The House by the Cerulean Sea and found it nice enough. Wasn't as good as I expected it to be from all the hype. I found it sentimental, actually. I like all that stuff, you know, like we're going to have queer books for teens and for kids, but there was just something, it was like a kind of slightly winsome X-Men. So I wasn't sure, but people still go on about T.J. Klune. This is an earlier one called The Extraordinaries, and it's about superheroes, I believe. So I thought I might like it, and it was worth it for £2. In Nova City, there are extraordinary people, capable of feats that defy the imagination. And then there's Nick, who, well, being the most popular fan fiction writer in the Extraordinaries fandom, is a superpower, right? This kind of pally blurb writing is annoying. Instead of fighting crime, Nick contends with a new year at school, a father who doesn't trust him, and a best friend named Seth, who may or may not be the love of Nick's short, uneventful life. It should be enough, but after a chance encounter with shadows, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it goes on. The fan fiction stuff really interests me because it's a world that I am obviously really interested in. I love Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell, more than anything in that kind of genre. The conjunction of kids realizing they're gay and superheroes is, of course, something I wrote about a lot in Strange Boy. So I thought I'd like this. And because I loved Madeline Miller's Song of Achilles so much earlier this year, I have been looking askance at the other myth-rewriting bestsellers that have come along since then. and there's a slew of them in the 10 or 15 years since Achilles. Ariadne is one of them, by Jennifer Saint. So I thought I'd try this because I love the whole Ariadne story. I love the stuff about, is it Theseus? I'm mixed up now. Yes, it's Theseus, isn't it? And his story. And he kind of abandons Ariadne. And I think she goes to the bad, doesn't she? Or is that Medea? Or do they both go to the bad? No, I think Ariadne is kind of has a tough time. Anyway, I thought I would try another myth retelling. And then a David Solomon's Doctor Who novel, The Secret in Vault 13. Now, Puffin did these. It's a few years since, before I started doing Puffin books for Doctor Who. And these were dismissed as just kids' stuff. Now, this I don't get about Doctor Who fans at all. It's a kids' show. The books that they love, the target books, were written for kids between 8 to 12, but really they were like 8 to 80, like the TV show itself. Doctor Who is meant to appeal to the young at heart who stay young at heart forever. But when they get a book series this is an adult one and this is a kids one, they kind of just ignore the kids version, which seems a bit of a shame. This to me seems full of kind of life and energy. It's got drawings in. Its first chapter is called Diddly Dum Woo Woo, which I think is hilarious. It's irreverent. I think fitting Jodie's Doctor and this time in the show, 2018. There was something irreverent about it, and I loved that. And this does seem a bit of a kind of slightly crazy take on Doctor Who fiction. I think he did too. So I missed it at the time, and I'm hoping to catch up. Those were the things from Friday, apart from things arriving in the post from eBay. And this was me when I was full of that enthusiasm last week. It's still there, though, for comic fantasy and realising how much I love that genre. Last week I was thinking about Terry Pratchett and how, yes, I'd given him a go over the years, but I really did love those books in the 80s, the first few. And there were other people I'd read who I'd forgotten about. And I was just kind of idly looking things up online and found myself buying Robert Asprin, Another Fine Myth, which is the first in his myth series. And I've read this. God knows when I read this. 1991, probably. That feels right. 1991 was when I found that bookshop in Darlington there was a remainder shop that had lots and lots of American fantasy books, usually Ace or Del Rey or Barclay. Very cheap in stacks, every genre going. And I think I read this then. But I didn't read any more, so I'm going to return to it. Craig Shaw Gardner, A Malady of Magics. And I did read his another series by him about dwarves. Don't know how far I got in that, but that was the same time, about 1991. You can see how my thinking is hovering around the early 90s at the moment, going back to the Whale Tail Cafe in Lancaster and buying these kinds of fantasy books with Josh Kirby paintings on the front, doomed to repeat all my favourite bits. And alongside these came the first in a series of anthologies from Mammoth Books, edited by Mike Ashley. He did some anthologies of comic fantasy. These Mammoth Books are really good, I think. There's been loads of them over the years, and I've bought various ones to dip into. You never really read them from beginning to end. The only ones I read from beginning to end are the ones edited by Ellen Datlow and Terry Windling, who did anthologies of fantasy and horror, one each year, and they were stunning. The ghost stories I read from beginning to end as well. That was in the 90s, the modern kind of up-to-date ghost stories. They were always edited by Steve Jones, somebody who I was delighted when he turned up at the launch for Never the Bride. But he said something so rude about that book at that launch to me, sotto voce, that I've tried not to think about him ever since. Anyway, that was my comic fantasy spree from eBay. Following that, there were no books on Saturday because we were bird watching. And even though there was a second-hand bookstall in the cafe, I didn't spring for anything on Saturday and felt virtuous for not accruing any further books. However, Sunday, of course, was the old Pier Bookshop. There's their bookmark club that they popped in with my bag full of books. I'm not sure what the picture is of. Oh, the Winter Gardens. That's quite nice. This was where I bought books that I've already read and needed new copies of. I did go in saying, I do hope they have copies of the Corgi science fiction best of series that began in the mid-60s and went on till the late 70s. I think I've talked before about having book 1 and book 2. And it turned out they had all of them. They were all £5 each. It makes it too easy when the whole series is just there. I'm going to buy them in order and read them in order. They didn't have book 3. I think the earliest one they had was book 10. So it wasn't all of them, but it was a lot of them. So I didn't. I let them alone. But I did buy a copy of Good Omens, which again I read in 1991 or 2, out of the library in Lancaster, which we walked past yesterday. I used to get a lot of books out of that library in town. I used to use it for kind of contemporary stuff, as opposed to using the library at the university for academic stuff. This is a nice copy. And weirdly, oh, another bookmark. Weirdly, I think it's a first edition. Victor Galance, 1990. Although it says Guild Publishing by arrangement with Victor Galance. I don't know what that means. It doesn't seem to be a book club kind of edition. Don't know. But, I mean, it's battered, it's red, it's tatty. It's certainly worth a £5. It'll be nice to return to, and it's one of the cornerstones, I think, of that kind of 80s, 90s comic fantasy genre, which I really do feel like exploring more of, because it's something I feel very at home in, and I feel like I've been writing anyway over the years. So, Good Omens, read it before. A Spell for Chameleon, Piers Anthony. I've read this. It's the first in the Xanth series of fantasy novels he wrote. This goes back to, I don't know, 77, and I must have read this in the early 90s as well. And I read a couple of these. I liked them. I think they're a bit sexist. I think there is that. It's like, oh, God. And that is a feature of the comic fantasy genre, the kind of straight, beery boys being boyish, which is kind of annoying, but that's kind of up for subversion as well, I think, in taking on that genre. So I'll be interested to go back to Piers Anthony, because, he's an important figure in the American side of this genre. V, The Pursuit of Diana. I had a copy of this in 1985-4. It was the third. By then, I devoured A.C. Crispin's V. I devoured East Coast Crisis by Howard Weinstein and A.C. Crispin, the one where the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade balloons are filled with the red dust, the compound that's going to kill the visitors, and they shoot them down in the middle of the parade and asphyxiate all the visitors in New York. I think I prefer East Coast Crisis to the actual original V. And this was the quite soapy sequel to both by Alan Wold, focusing, of course, on Diana, who was fabulous. She was the Joan Collins of V in 1984. Earlier this year, I read the Japanese one and loved it. even though it looked like the tackiest one, the least interesting one in some ways, because I thought it was just going to be about fighting. But it was fantastic. Right, I must speed on. I'm 25 minutes into this. And then the last thing I found in the old Pier Bookshop was a copy of this. I haven't had a copy of this in exactly this edition since I was a kid. I read this in 1980 when I was 10. Ahead of seeing the film, we never went to the pictures to see Empire Strikes Back because my father had moved out by then and my stepfather wouldn't take us. And I read the novelisation by Donald F. Glut quite quickly, but I remember being obsessed, and even at the wake for my step-grandfather, I couldn't take my eyes off the page. I was sitting on a buffet in the corner of their living room while all the parents were weeping and drinking sherry and eating stuff from the buffet. I wasn't leaving The Empire Strikes Back for anything. All of these cost about £1 each, which is marvellous. Apart from Good Omens, which cost me a £5. As I said, I don't spend a fortune on these things. I buy a lot of books, but I don't spend a fortune. In Lancaster, I spent even less. 50p each on these two. And the weird thing about these two puffins is that we were talking about them on this channel last week. On my show, I was talking about dragons in the last episode I did, maybe Friday or Thursday last week. And remembering Rosemary Manning, because I couldn't find my copy of Green Smoke, which is here somewhere, and then saying there were sequels. I remember there being sequels, but I don't think I've got them. And there were various comments from you lot about Rosemary Manning. The most tasteful of you had read her and remembered how wonderful she was. And these books with their illustrations, their wonderful illustrations. These are the two sequels, Dragon in Danger and The Dragon's Quest. How weird to have had that discussion last week and then to walk into a charity shop in Lancaster just before lunch and find the two sequels for 50p each. Whoops, books are falling. For 50p each. Just magical. Anyway, I'm ready to go back to whatever the town is in Cornwall. I forget. The imaginary town where the little girl, is it Sarah? They're holding hands, going along the beach with her dragon. Dragons are always, as I said, slightly waspish and snooty in the best dragon stories. Speaking of which, I've had to abandon Aragon halfway through. 250 pages, it turns out, is quite enough for me in that world. There's things about it I like, but I'm going to have to be brutal and move on, I think. I've got other things to read. It's turgid. That's what it is. It needs a kind of a greater lightness of touch. I love the heart in it. The connection between the boy and the dragon, the building of the world, the tentative steps into that world. But it does get caught up a bit in lore building and fighting. But then epic fantasy always does, doesn't it? Sometimes it can carry me with it, other times not. There's not much going on character-wise. That's what it is. It's as if Star Wars was just about Ben Kenobi and Luke. The whole thing. And, you need Princess Leia. You need the droids. You need the female characters and the funny characters. Right, almost done. I ordered myself a brand new copy, because it was reduced, of Asako Yuzuki's Butter, a serial killer novel, which I've seen everywhere. It's been really pushed everywhere. But it's my choice for book club next month. We've loosened the rule on not suggesting books that you haven't read. It was a rule that came in a couple of years ago. And I think it's quite a good one in a way that you can stand by books and somebody's going to like it. But actually, trying out new things is probably better for all of us. And all the women in book club love a good murdery book. Everybody loves thrillers in the group, so I suggested Butter. We did the thing on Thursday of planning ahead 8 months into the future with book club, which is a very nicely organised thing to do, setting dates and venues around each other's houses so we know we've got things in the diary and other things can go around them, and then suggesting each of our books for those months so we can buy them ahead. And they've started arriving. This is the first. Anyway, that's everything that I've brought into the house in the last 3 or 4 days. It's quite a lot. I will stop buying books or lessen or slacken off or something. Okay, good. I'm going to take it easy today. I've written my words this morning. I'm working on something that I might tell you about in a while. And I've just got a heap of things I want to dip into for the afternoon. It's red hot, almost too hot to move. Like the old Triffids song, too hot to think, too hot to move. Yeah, I've got a whole heap of things that I want to just dawdle through in the afternoon. I hope all of you are well and that you leave comments below and subscribe and go and look at my Patreon where I'm publishing new fiction in episodes every week, and it costs about £2 or £3 a month to join. So do have a look at Patreon, like and click and all that stuff below. And I will see you again quite soon on this channel. Goodbye.